Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Nelson, here on this very wonderful, very fantastic, very joy-filled Monday afternoon. And we've got a lot to talk about in this podcast for today. Now, the reason why it's so joyous is because this isn't even going to be the first segment, but I have to say it. Daniel Jones has finally been benched. I'm so excited. That's going to be the second segment, but in the first segment, we're going to talk about Jake Paul against Mike Tyson and that fight. I mean, if you want to call it a fight, I don't know what you call it, honestly. And then in the third segment, we're going to look at Josh Allen and how the Bills were able to defeat the Chiefs. They became the first team to ever beat the Chiefs this season. And we're going to talk about that and how Josh Allen has made an MVP case for himself. And then in the fourth segment, we're going to quickly, very, very quickly, do a little recap of all of the games that went down. We're going to talk about the games that I ended up getting right and the games that I ended up getting wrong in last week 11's matchup. And in the fourth segment. And then in the fifth segment, we're going to go ahead and talk about the Cowboys going up against the Texans and that preview of how I think the game is going to go down and what I think should happen in that game as well. And for the NFL recap, I'm not going to, talk about each game specifically because we won't have enough time for that. But I'm going to basically, sum up most of these games, how they went down, and my predictions for these games. And eventually I'll cover some more of these games in depth as the week goes on. But that's going to be what the third segment is. We also have a special fifth segment at the end of all of that. So be sure to stay tuned to the end to figure out what that is. I accidentally revealed it because, I love talking about that team. I love talking about how bad that team is. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, or anything that you're dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below in the ticker of every single show segment. That is gsmcspodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way as well. And I also want to apologize for being a little bit late. I did get held up in a meeting before the show, so I couldn't really get here on time, but that's unfortunate. So let's go right ahead and get into this first segment, which is talking about the Jake Paul against Mike Tyson boxing match. Again, if you can really call it a boxing match. I mean, this took place at around 12 o'clock at night. They had so many people tuning into this highly anticipated matchup because, as we know, Mike Tyson, he retired a long time ago, and then he comes out of retirement so that way Jake Paul can beat him. And that's really what all of these boxing matches with Jake Paul have been. It's like Jake Paul has been beating up more or less incompetent opponents, and saying that Mike Tyson is incompetent is something that I was not expecting to say, but that's sort of what it showed in this boxing match right now. Essentially, they did nothing. Neither side did anything that was noteworthy in this fight. They were just going around back and forth, dancing, practically dancing with each other, hopping back and forth. I mean, Tyson barely threw any punches in this match. Jake Paul was throwing all of the punches in this match, but nobody could really land a deliberate blow against one another. The first two rounds looked really, really good for Mike. He was ducking, he was weaving, and a lot of people thought that he was going to win, and a lot of the betting odds pointed that he was going to end up winning this fight. But as the fight progressed and as Mike Tyson took a really, really bad hit from Jake Paul, they sort of regressed and they just started hopping around back and forth. It was a really big letdown, if that, for lack of a better term, because I mean it was so boring, and so many people, they stayed up late trying to watch this fight, and what we got was barely even a fight to begin with. It was just awful. Like there are no words that can really that I can use to describe just how awful it was. Like you have to see the fight for yourself and you have to see exactly what I'm talking about. But I mean, it was such a letdown. Like it was terrible. I mean, I literally had to, since Mike Tyson, he retired when I was like 2 years old, I had to call my dad and I was like, Dad, how good was Mike Tyson? And I mean, everybody who watched him, everyone knows how good Mike Tyson was because this sort of inspired me to watch some of the old matches of Mike Tyson when he was back in his prime. And, I mean, he was a monster. There were several matches where he ended it in the first round. And everybody was, in awe with him. He was that guy. But in this match, when he's, super, super old, and, well, not really super, super old, but again, he's, well past his prime. We should have seen the result. We should have known that Jake Paul was going to end up winning. But I mean, I guess all of those hype videos of Mike Tyson training got everybody super excited. And not only that, most of the time when you tune into these kinds of matches, you usually want Jake Paul to get knocked out and hit in the face. But most of the opponents that Jake Paul goes up against, as I said before, they tend to be rather incompetent. And they tend to not necessarily have all that much boxing experience. Tyson, he does have the experience, but again, the age is just what was holding him back. I mean, everyone knows that if Mike Tyson was in his prime, he would have ended this in 10 seconds. It would not even have been a competition against these two fighters. And it's really, really sad. It was really sad to see that this was the way that he had to go out. I mean, it's like Michael Jordan playing on the Wizards if I had to compare it to anything. And even then, Michael Jordan was still pretty competent while he was on the Wizards. He was far from the best, but he was still rather competent. And this is that same level of competence Mike Tyson was unable to reach. And it's just He was that guy back in the day. I mean, there were several games named after him. I mean, I know Punch-Out, a very, very old NES game. That it was literally called Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And a little bit of a trivia, he somewhat is a character in the Street Fighter game. So let me go ahead and I'll explain that for just a little bit. So the boxer in Street Fighter in Japan goes by the name of Mike Bison when Street Fighter 2 came out. And obviously, that sounds a lot like Mike Tyson, but America had to sort of change that name when the game was released over in America because there was an alleged scandal going on around with Mike Tyson, and I don't want to get into that, but that was sort of a reason why that name had to be changed. But that character was sort of inspired by Mike Tyson, and it's he really was that guy that everybody feared and that everybody was afraid of. And I mean, if you get hit by Mike Tyson, then chances are you are going to get knocked out and you are going to have so many concussions and you are probably going to have CTE. But in this fight, that didn't really happen. I mean, Tyson he had more times where he was biting his glove than when he was actually throwing punches. I believe he bit his glove around 40 times, and he only punched 19 times. And from what I've been told, apparently when Mike Tyson bites his glove, it means that he's nervous. And that just shows you and when Mike Tyson is nervous, I mean, you know he doesn't have it left in the tank. It was just after the second round, it was really just making sure that he doesn't get knocked out and he can, still walk after the fight ends. And I don't think Jake Paul really wanted to hurt him that much either. And I mean, this was it was just bad. I mean, it was super boring. I can't even talk about the fight all that much because there's nothing to really talk about. There was no real highlight play. There was nothing that highlighted this fight that would make you want to watch it. If I could get those hours back, I would love to get those hours back because I just wasted so much time trying to not only stay up for the fight, but expecting a good fight. I shouldn't have expected a good fight, honestly. I mean, Mike Tyson is so old right now. I don't even know how old he is, but I know he is old. Let's actually go ahead and check how old he is. I mean, Yeah, 58 years old, and that's the guy that Jake Paul wanted to fight, a 58-year-old man. It's really just like, no, you're beating up on uncle at this point, or worse, you're beating up on grandpa at this point. It was not fun to watch. It was boring. It was dull. Nobody threw punches. They were just going around back and forth dancing. And at some points in the fight, Mike Tyson even looked like he was about to fall or like lose balance. It was boring. And I did not like it at all. And it was definitely not worth staying up all that time just to wait for that. I mean, it was awful. But I mean, you guys can watch it. You guys can all of it was on Netflix. It's probably still on Netflix. There's also some YouTube highlights on it as well, if there even were highlights to be drawn from this game. I don't recommend watching this fight at all. If you want to get bored and you really have nothing else to do in your life and you want to see something, then yes, you can watch that. But again, it's like, no, don't even bother. And that's all that I really have to say. The fight was super boring. So let's go to something that isn't boring, which is the NFL. That's going to be all of the segments going forward. We're going to talk about the Giants benching Daniel Jones, my favorite news throughout the entire day. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we're going to talk about the Giants finally pulling the plug on Daniel Jones. This is the best day of my life. I am so happy. I ran around laps in this room. Once I found the news, I am just in awe. And I can barely contain myself with all of this joy. And before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something that you've just been dying to share, we're all ears. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. Using gsmcspodcast.net. You can send in your comments and or donations that way as well. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So let's go right ahead. It's a glorious day in New Jersey. It's a glorious day in New York because this man is no longer the quarterback for the New York Giants. He has been demoted to the third string because that is what he deserves. That's what he gets for catfishing us in 2020 when he won that playoff game and did absolutely nothing afterwards. He has been awful this season, and thank the Lord that he has been benched. This is the first step to getting out of mediocrity, and not even mediocrity, getting out of poverty at this point. Because right now the Giants, they're 2-8. Thanks to Daniel Jones. I mean, fantastic quarterback, right? He's been absolutely horrible. In fact, there's actually a debate on which quarterback was worse, either Aaron Rodgers or like in New Jersey, which quarterback is worse, Aaron Rodgers or Daniel Jones. There's actually a legitimate argument for that, but nothing can get worse than this man. I mean, it was terrible. The 6 years with him were mostly terrible. And we took a chance on him. Thankfully, we structured the contract so that way we can opt out of him after 2 years, which is what we're doing. He played the 2 years of his contract. The first year of that new contract, he was injured for most of the season. And then when he came back in this season, he's been absolutely terrible. Only 2 wins to show for it in this season. He's been awful. There's no other words to describe it other than awful. And there are so many words that I have for Daniel Jones that I cannot say on air. But basically, let's sum it all down. So, I mean, he's just terrible. He's missed several games due to injury, and despite this, he has the 5th most turnovers out of any NFL player since 2019. Think of that. He missed almost an entire season last year, and he's missed several games due to injury, and he's still one of the top 5 in turnovers. He has 73 total turnovers since 2019. And it's been terrible. Absolutely terrible. He can't throw the ball deep. He has no idea how to handle pressure. He has no idea how to run the ball anymore, which is something that he was pretty good at. And most of the time in Giants games, the less he threw the ball, the better, which is a big reason why the Giants ended up making the playoffs and winning a playoff game in 2022, because Daniel Jones did not need to throw the ball nearly as much as he needs to do now. And it's just been bad. It's been absolutely horrible. And everything else with the Giants is not even that bad. We had a solid defensive line. The O-line could use some work, but in the beginning of the season, the O-line was incredibly solid. Receivers, again, could use some work, but Malik Neighbors has shown a lot of promise in this season, despite the fact that Daniel Jones is his quarterback. And the defense, we need a good corner, obviously, and the secondary it's a little bit, there are some weaknesses in the secondary, but more often than not, the Giants' defense has been rather solid. I have no complaints on the defense, and all of my complaints are on Daniel Jones, because he is just not the guy of the future. The Giants finally realize that, and they finally decide to bench him. And, I mean, the Giants were able to hold the Bengals to 17 points. And compared to every other team, I mean, the Chargers, they only held them to 27. The Ravens held them to 34. The Raiders let them score 41. The Eagles held them to 17, so, more or less the exact same. The Browns could not stop them, held them to 21. And really, it was just bad quarterback play that caused the Giants to lose against the Bengals. I mean, he was the main culprit. In almost every single game that the Bengals have played, they scored at least 20 points. And the Giants' defense has performed rather solid in that game, but of course, Daniel Jones just could not do that. Now, he's been demoted to 3rd string, which is really just the ultimate punishment. Like, that just shows how awful he is. The fact that Drew Lock would be able to start over him. But really, the main concern is that the Giants don't want him to get injured because they don't want him to be playing, they don't want to pay Daniel Jones any more money than he deserves. And the starter for the Giants now is going to be Tommy Cutlass, Tommy DeVito, hometown hero in New Jersey, hometown hero for New York. But this is the problem that we have with Tommy. Last season, when Tommy got the starting role, he ended up winning some games, which was good, but it wasn't good at the time because the season was already over. And once Tommy got in, they started winning games. And that in turn affected the draft pick that the Giants. So instead of being a higher pick in the draft, they ended up being a lower pick in the draft, which ultimately costed us a chance to draft a quarterback. However, I don't think it was all that bad. Because at that point, I wanted to give Daniel Jones another chance. I should have known better. But we also got Malik Neighbors, and it's not like Neighbors is a bad pick in this draft at all. And, I mean, the running back that we got in the draft as well has also been pretty solid. Tracy Jr., he's been great in a lot of these games. And it's just tragic. It's sad to see that we are just one quarterback away from being out of mediocrity. It was just bad. And all of these great young players that we have are essentially useless because Daniel Jones cannot throw the ball down the field. But yeah, Tyrone Tracy Jr., he's been phenomenal as a running back. A spot that I didn't think was going to be rather strong for the Giants, since we gave up Saquon. But this is the start of a brand new era at quarterback, and I am so happy that we finally decided to pull the plug on this man. And it's not surprising, nor is it unreasonable to make this move either. I mean, Jones got 6 years of auditioning to be the Giants quarterback, and the less involved he's been, the better the Giants have been. It's uncanny, and it's like, I don't know. I really don't know why we stuck with this man for 6 years. I genuinely do not. I would have rather seen Drew Lock be the quarterback than Tommy DeVito, mainly because I really want I don't want the Giants to win anymore. The season is over, so I would much rather get a higher pick in this draft and get a quarterback. Just anything other than Daniel Jones at quarterback for another year. Just anything, please. That's all that I want, and this seems to be the best chance that we're going to get, because this quarterback in the draft could be the future of the franchise. And I want him gone. I want him discarded. I want him gone completely, please. But Drew Lock conceivably offered more upside than Jones, and as a majority of the signings do, and a majority of the quarterbacks do. But this begs for another question. Why did we get to this point? Why did it take the Giants more than a half decade to reach this conclusion? Why did it take almost 3 years to reach this conclusion? And I don't know. I mean, he did catfish us with that one playoff win, so that might have been the reason. But a big reason was that Eli Manning was like, he really wanted us to draft this guy, and it was just a really, really big disappointment. And he may not have properly elevated the Giants and in these games, but like the staff, like there's a growing argument that the staff and the GMs, they didn't really give him the pieces that he needed to be successful, and that's really like the biggest defense for Daniel Jones every single time. But the reality is that despite any of that, Daniel Jones just did not change anything in the game. I mean, I was done with him after week 1 of this season. And ever since then, he's constantly overthrown receivers more than 20 yards. He has the worst passer rating of any quarterback that throws more than 20 yards. Last time I checked the passer rating for Daniel Jones when he throws more than 20 yards, I believe my sister is older than that passer rating. It was 16.5. It was absolutely awful. And it was just tragic. But now, this is a clean slate. I want the Giants to win games, of course, but I also don't want them to win games because this could cost us a pick in the draft. And depending on how, right now, it doesn't really seem like we're going to have the number 1 pick in the draft as of yet, because, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they've been worse than us. For as bad as the Giants have been, they've been just as bad. The Jaguars are 2-9, and not only that, the Browns are also 2-8. So tied with the Giants and having a really bad record. There are a lot of teams that are really incompetent. The Raiders are also 2-8, and if Tommy DeVito, if he ends up winning some games, this could really, really affect our draft positioning. Not only that, the Titans, they're also 2-8, and so there are a lot of teams that only have 2 wins. Or barely have more than 2 wins. The Patriots, they're 3-8, and over in the AFC East, the Jets are 3-8, and it's like all of these teams, they're going to have a chance of being able to draft really high in this upcoming draft, and they could potentially take some of the quarterbacks that the Giants are looking to draft. I know that the GM, he recently went to a Colorado game. So it seems like he wants to gravitate towards drafting Shedeur Sanders, but I don't think that's really going to happen, mainly because Coach Prime, he did say he was going to intervene on some of these on some of the teams. Like, if he doesn't really like the team that's trying to draft one of his players, whether it be Travis Hunter or whether it be Shedeur Sanders, then he might intervene and just say, no, you're not going to draft them or something like that. I mean, he has a lot of influence, so I have no idea exactly what the situation is going to be with that. And it seems like Shedeur really wants to go to the Raiders, and like it seems like the Raiders really want him in return. I don't blame them, but I don't know how I feel about drafting Shedeur. But that's all that I have to say in this not this final segment, but in this second segment. Thank the Lord. Thank you that Daniel Jones is no longer going to be a quarterback. I am so, so happy. I cannot contain myself. Like I said, I ran laps around this room when I found the news, because now we don't have to worry about watching him play every single snap on every single given Sunday, or whichever primetime game that he's been a part of. I think he's only won like 2 primetime games. Like, just awful. But in this third segment, we're going to go ahead and go into Josh Allen and his MVP case, because the Bills recently beat the undefeated Chiefs, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that game because I did watch it right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we're going to be looking at the Bills and the Chiefs game, and we're going to mainly talk about Josh Allen in this game, and whether or not he has a legitimate case for being an MVP candidate, and just exactly what the odds are looking in his favor, as well as just a brief overview of this game that happened as well. So I watched this game, and going into this game, I expected the Chiefs were going to win, but I was wrong. And a lot of people, they sort of circled this week on their calendar, because not only is this like, you know, Chiefs versus Bills, a classic matchup between these two AFC rivals, especially in the postseason, but this was a pretty solid quarterback battle. And a lot of people, if the Chiefs were going to lose any game this season, it was going to be this one. A lot of people really expected them to lose to the Bills if there was any game that they were going to end up dropping. And they did not get lucky in this matchup. And this matchup, it was still really close. I mean, the final score was 30-21 in favor of the Bills, but the matchup was still rather close. Patrick Mahomes, he ended the game throwing only 196 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He's been very underwhelming as the Chiefs quarterback in not just this game, but in this season. I mean, his passing touchdown to interception ratio is 15 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. So he's not been nearly as good at protecting the ball as we're accustomed to seeing in previous seasons, and he's nowhere near been the monster that a lot of people sort of fear in the regular season like he was years prior. And it's really unfortunate, because I really thought that if there was any player that could pass Tom Brady as the greatest player of all time, it would be Patrick Mahomes, not only with his resume, but just his abilities as a quarterback. And, you know, he still has a couple more years as a quarterback, so not even a couple. He still has several more years that he could be playing. So we'll see how that career sort of unfolds. And the season is still rather young, so, it's not like their Super Bowl chances have been affected in the slightest despite this loss. But this was a very, very close game, and it was a game that ended with Patrick Mahomes throwing a game-losing interception. I mean, in the fourth quarter, they both just woke up. And I mean, most of the game was a little bit of snooze fest. I mean, Patrick Mahomes on the first play of the drive threw an interception, so that wasn't an ideal start for him. And then the Bills answered right back with a touchdown of their own, and they did not convert on the extra point, unfortunately. But still, Kansas City would punt the ball and after a 3-and-out, and then the Bills would punt the ball after 6 plays. Then in the second quarter was where a lot of the scoring, was where some of the scoring ended up starting. So the Chiefs, they opened up with a touchdown. Then the Bills opened up and answered back with another touchdown. And after a 3-and-out from the Chiefs, Josh Allen threw an interception after a 4-play drive. And it was on 4th and 3, so, they were going for it on 4th down, which is something that you sort of need to do when you're going up against the Chiefs, and, it's a risk that you have to take, because if you can get a lead on the Chiefs, you kind of have to try and capitalize on that. Not to mention, I mean, the Bills, they have been a very solid team on converting 4th downs, and they just couldn't get one off in this one, and the Chiefs ended up capitalizing on this mishap by scoring a touchdown after that interception. But the Bills quickly responded with a field goal to end the first half, with a score of 16-14. So this game has been close, right? However, in the third quarter, it was a punt off. So the Bills, they ended up punting, the Chiefs ended up punting, then the Bills punted again, and then the Chiefs punted again. So it was just straight punts in the third quarter, and then in the fourth quarter, everybody woke up. The Bills, they opened up with a 10-play touchdown drive. Then the Chiefs opened up with another 10-play touchdown drive of their own. And then the Bills, they ended up, at this point, the score was 21-23 in favor of Buffalo. And usually, if you follow the trend that the season has shown with the Chiefs, you would have expected that the Chiefs would somehow get a stop. And once they did get the stop, then Patrick Mahomes would have walked down the field and they would have scored and they would have won the game. But Josh Allen said nope and decided to run the ball all the way towards the end zone and score a touchdown. It was a very manly run, if I do say so myself. And I mean, nobody really expected him to do all that, but he broke several tackles and ended up making his way into the end zone. It was a 26-yard touchdown drive. It was a 26-yard touchdown run by Josh Allen, and this ultimately put the game somewhat out of reach because it was 30-21, and, a lot of people, they like to joke that the Chiefs had dark magic and they find ways to win that nobody really expects them to find ways to win, but it did not happen in this game as Patrick Mahomes threw a costly interception, which ultimately sealed the win for Buffalo. Now, with this win, Buffalo is now 9-2, and currently, I believe, aside from the Chiefs, I believe they have the best record in the entirety of the AFC. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly check the standings right now. Yeah, aside from the Chiefs, they're the only other team that has 9 wins in the entire AFC. In the NFC, the Lions are 9-1, same record as the Chiefs, and the other team that's close to getting their record is the Steelers, who are 8-2. And speaking of the Steelers, they played the Ravens, and this is where Josh Allen getting into the MVP conversation gets into the mix. So the Steelers, they ended up playing the Ravens in this matchup, and the Steelers, they ended up winning against the Ravens in this matchup, thus moving them to the top spot in their division by beating the Ravens. I mean, Lamar Jackson has had a history of not being able to beat the Steelers, and this loss really affects his MVP conversation and really affects him in the MVP conversation because now Josh Allen sort of has a good chance to be in the MVP conversation now and possibly win the MVP outside of Lamar Jackson. I mean, based off of individual stats, it doesn't really seem like he's all that close. I mean, Lamar Jackson has 25 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. He threw one of those interceptions against the Steelers, but he only completed 48% of his passes. He has 2,876 yards, like passing yards, in this season, compared to Josh Allen's 2,543. And Josh Allen has fewer touchdowns, but also has more interceptions than Lamar Jackson. So from an individual standpoint, it doesn't really seem like Josh Allen is by far the better quarterback than Lamar Jackson. However, looking at team record and looking at the standings, and MVP, it usually goes to the best quarterback that's on the best team. And if we look at the standings and we look at their records right now, the Ravens, they're 7-4 compared to the Bills being 9-2. So now Josh Allen, with this win under his belt against the undefeated team in the NFL, well, former undefeated team in the NFL, this greatly boosts his chances of winning the MVP. If he can somewhat, play some of the best football towards the end of the season, then he might win the MVP. It really does look like he can. I mean, the next game that he plays is going to be against the Niners. He plays at home. The Niners, they recently came off of a really bad loss. More on that later. And if he ends up winning in this matchup, this also gives him a pretty good boost. Again, the Niners, they aren't nearly as good as they were in previous years. They're 5-5. But again, if he can play really well against the Niners, and then the next game is against the Rams, and then the next game is against the Lions. Again, if he's able to win out in these games, then the MVP race could be his to lose. And compared to the Ravens schedule, let's actually go ahead and look at the Ravens schedule going into the future, if I can find that game. There we go. Ravens schedule. Let's see. Who do they play? They're going to play the Chargers on Monday, and then they're going to play the Eagles, and then they're going to play the Giants, which they're going to win. Then they play the Steelers again, and then they're going to play the Texans, and then the Browns. So it's really close now, this MVP race. Before, it was just, Lamar Jackson. It seemed like he was going to run away with this MVP, but now it seems like, it's going to be really close, either between Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. Again, Lamar Jackson, he does have individually, he has much better stats than Josh Allen. But Josh Allen has the team record, and he also has the win against the Chiefs, which is really something to boast about. Again, the season is still rather young, so we will have to see how that goes through the rest of these weeks and see how it unfolds. So that's all that I have to say in this third segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment, where we do a very quick little recap of these NFL games, because I predicted the outcomes of some of these games, and we're going to go ahead and look at my previous predictions and see how many of them I ended up getting right, how many of them I ended up getting wrong, and we'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned. Again, it's just going to be quick. I'm not going to completely cover every single game in the NFL that happened, but I will cover some of those games because I was unable to watch all of them. And throughout the week, I'll probably look at all of these games a little bit more in depth and what it could mean for each and every single one of their seasons. So I'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we're going to do a very quick recap of all of the games that went down in the NFL yesterday. And really, we're going to, let's see, what team should we start with? What team should we start with today? So, you know what? We're going to start with the first prediction that I made, which was the Packers beating the Bears. And of course, the Packers, they ended up beating the Bears. It was a really, really close one, though. I will say that. It was a very, very, very close game. But as always, the Packers, they defeated the Bears. The Bears now hold the biggest losing streak to any opponent. I believe they've lost 11 straight games to the Packers for the last few years. And it's really not been looking good for Chicago against the Packers. It seems like every single year the Packers just own them. Every single year. And this game was no exception. And the way that this ended just completely ruined the fans, completely ruined all of their hopes. Because the Bears, any game against the Packers, it feels like that's their Super Bowl. Like, they always try, and they always want to beat the Packers, but they never ever are able to do it. So this is why it's like their Super Bowl. And the fans, they really get into it, even though they end up losing in the end. And the way that they lost was absolutely hilarious. I mean, the Caleb Williams, he ended up driving the team down the field in the final play of the game. And it was 7 plays. He was able to drive them down to 42 yards, well in field goal range. But of course, the kick was blocked, and that resulted in the Packers squeezing out a win 20-19. It is the most Bears way to lose in a game, honestly. Like, Jordan Love, he played pretty solid. He only threw 17 passes, but he made them count, completing 13 of them and throwing for 261 passing yards. He threw an interception in this game, but he also threw a touchdown in this game. Josh Jacobs, he ended the game with 18 rushing attempts, 76 yards, and 1 touchdown. And Jordan Love also ran for a touchdown in this matchup. And, I mean, the Bears, they're just the Bears. I did not expect them to win this game at all. And this was probably the only time that they would be able to beat Green Bay, because next time they match up, they're going to have to play in Green Bay, and Green Bay usually always has a huge matchup advantage when they play in Lambeau Field, because their fans are absolutely incredible. Now, on the Bears side, Caleb Williams, he did not score a touchdown in this game, but he also did not throw an interception. That's sort of been a pretty common trend with Caleb Williams in a lot of these games. I mean, the last time Caleb threw a touchdown was against Jacksonville. And that was in, let's see, what week was that in? That was the 13th of October. So it's been almost a whole month, and this man has yet to throw another touchdown. But on the bright side, he also hasn't thrown an interception either. But, I mean, again, this is just pitiful. I mean, he is a high pick in the draft. A lot of people have expectations for him, and I also have expectations for him. And he's not been living up to it at all. And let's see, who played well? DeAndre Swift, he ended up getting 71 rushing yards on the day, along with 1 rushing touchdown. And Rashawn Johnson also ended the game with a rushing touchdown. But again, this game just was never in doubt, really. If you're a Packers fan, then you know exactly why. Speaking of Packers fans, their former quarterback Aaron Rodgers ended up losing yet again to the Colts. And it would seem like the benching of Anthony Richardson was ultimately ended up being a big reason why the Colts ended up winning this game. So there were reports going around that ever since Anthony Richardson was benched, he ultimately sort of grew up, and he realized that, okay, I need to do a little bit more. I need to be a little bit more for this team. And that's what the reports are saying. And in this game, he ended up completing 20 of his 30 pass attempts, incredibly accurate. Also threw for a touchdown and was able to accumulate 272 passing yards in this game, along with 32 rushing yards in this game. And he also accounted for 2 rushing touchdowns for this team as well. So essentially, he scored every single touchdown for the Colts offensively. And meanwhile, the Jets, of course, they're stuck to being the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, he did not play bad, but he also did not play good enough to win this game either. Completed 22 of his 29 pass attempts, only 184 yards. He has yet to throw 300 passing yards in a game, by the way. He did throw for 2 touchdowns. Breece Hall, he ran for a touchdown as well, and also accumulated for 78 rushing yards. Davante Adams has been rather lackluster, and it really seemed like all the hype around Davante Adams going to the Jets was all for nothing. And, I mean, the game, it seemed like the Jets were going to be able to put this game away, especially in the fourth quarter. The Jets opened up with a touchdown to make the score 24-16, but the Colts answered right back with a touchdown of their own to make the score 22-24. And instead of capitalizing with another touchdown for Aaron Rodgers, they had to settle with a field goal. This was a 13-play, 53-yard drive that ended in a field goal. And ultimately, it left enough time for the Colts and Anthony Richardson to go on a game-winning touchdown drive and put the game away 28-27. And in the final plays of the game, the Aaron Rodgers ended up taking a sack, and the Jets ended up losing. And one of the things that I do like to note about this game was that, let's see, Sauce Gardner, the very popular corner on the Jets, and considered to be a very elite corner, he recently in a press conference a week ago, a while ago before this game started, that he felt like he did not need to focus on tackle drills because everybody knew how to tackle. And ironically enough, he missed a tackle which caused the game-winning touchdown. So maybe they don't know everything about tackling. But this wasn't just an Aaron Rodgers effort in losing. This was a whole team effort. The team just collapsed, and I mean, the defense let Aaron Rodgers down again with the game in the balance. I'm sure a lot of you Packers fans, you already know exactly how that feels. And I mean, I picked the Jets to win in this matchup, but they let me down. I should have never picked the Jets, and in fact, I think I'm done picking the Jets to win in these games because I mean, let's face it, these Jets, they're abysmal. They've had a better record with Zach Wilson at quarterback than they've had with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, which is very crazy to say, but true. And it's really unfortunate that that's sort of how the career of Aaron Rodgers has been turning out on New York. It's like apparently they have all of the pieces, but it's just they cannot get these games, they cannot win these games. And it really is unfortunate because, I mean, when Tom Brady left to the Patriots, I cannot stand Tom Brady, but the very first year that he left, he was able to win a Super Bowl. And as much as I don't think it was just Brady for being the reason why the Bucs ended up winning that Super Bowl, he still won it and he still got the Super Bowl MVP. There are several asterisks on a lot of those games, but, you know, aside from that, I'm not going to talk about that. I could talk about that, however, if you guys want me to talk about it, because Brady has had several moments where he gets bailed out by his team and he gets incredibly lucky, but nobody wants to talk about it. But I'm not going to get into that. Again, let me know if you guys want me to get into that. But that was a game that I ended up getting wrong, but the Rams, they ended up beating the Patriots 28-22, and Drake May, he was pretty mediocre in this game, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, but again, way better off with Drake May than they were with Jacoby Brissett. Matt Stafford had a great game in this matchup with 2 touchdowns, 295 yards, 4 touchdowns, excuse me. And the Rams, they ended up winning like I expected them to. The Saints, they also ended up winning against the Browns, but again, it's against the Browns. Derek Carr, he's such a tease. He threw 248 yards and 2 touchdowns in this matchup. And Taysom Hill ended the game with 3 touchdowns. On 7 attempts, he rushed for 138 yards, which is incredible. And, I mean, that is incredible rushing stats coming in from him. Now, the Dolphins, they ended up completely destroying the Raiders, 34-19. Tua Tagovailoa ended with 3 touchdowns, 288 passing yards. And I mean, Tyreek Hill, he has not been the monster that we've seen in previous years. Jonnu Smith ended up leading the game in receiving yards for the Dolphins. He did not lead the entirety of the game. Brock Bowers did in receiving yards with 126. Tyreek Hill did score a touchdown, but Jonnu Smith ended up scoring 2 touchdowns. Now, another game that I knew was never going to be in doubt was the Lions going up against the Jaguars. The Lions destroyed the Jaguars. They ended up winning 52-6. Jared Goff threw for 412 yards and 4 touchdowns. And let's see, the receivers, they were unbelievable. I mean, Jameson Williams ended with 4 receptions on 124 yards with 1 touchdown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown ended with 11 receptions, 161 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, they were just on completely different. They were just a completely different team than the Jags, and the Jags really could not compete with them. And I really think that their head coach is most likely going to get fired after the results of this game. Now, in the next matchup, the Vikings, they ended up beating the Titans. I picked the Vikings to win this matchup. Sam Darnold, he did not throw an interception in this game. He threw 2 touchdowns. And, I mean, Justin Jefferson, he did not catch a touchdown in this matchup, but he did record 81 receiving yards in this game. And there's nothing that really needs to be said because the Titans are just not that good of a team. I already talked about the Ravens and the Steelers matchup. The Broncos against the Falcons. As I've said before, Kirk Cousins can never really stray too far away from having a 500 record. And Bo Nix played phenomenally in this game. 300 passing yards, 307, along with 4 passing touchdowns on the day. And, I mean, the Falcons, they could only muster 2 field goals. And it was just a bad game offensively for the Falcons. The Seahawks, they ended up beating the Niners. I'll talk a little bit more about that game in one of the future segments. But essentially, Geno Smith ended up winning the game for the Seahawks in this game. He ended up leading a game-winning touchdown drive. He did not really play fantastic. I mean, 221 passing yards. He did throw an interception. But Brock Purdy also threw an interception and only threw for 159 passing yards, but he did throw a touchdown, and he also ran for a touchdown. Christian McCaffrey has been very, very bad in these returns. He did accumulate over 100 yards, in the air and also on the ground, but again, it was just barely 100 yards. And on the ground, he only accounted for 79 rushing yards on 19 attempts. So again, not the same player that we've seen before, but again, his season is still young. This is only his second week playing, but the Niners, they definitely aren't the same machine that they were previous years. And the Seahawks, they ended up winning this game despite a lackluster performance from Geno Smith. And another game that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in depth in the future is the Bengals going up against the Chargers. The Bengals, they ended up losing 27-34 to the Chargers, and it really looked like this game was going to go into overtime. And both of these quarterbacks, they played really solid in the game overall. It was more of a second half performance from Joe Burrow that gave them a chance to win. He threw for 356 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in this game. And if it wasn't for their team record, he would have a really solid argument for being in the MVP conversation. T. Higgins had a great game in this matchup, 9 receptions and 148 receiving yards to go along with that as well. And on the Chargers side, Justin Herbert threw for almost 300 yards and ended with 2 passing touchdowns. But J.K. Dobbins ended up sealing this game for the Chargers, and he scored the game-winning touchdown in the end. And both quarterbacks in the fourth quarter, towards the end, they played as badly as humanly possible. And, I mean, it ultimately ended up leading to the Chargers winning the game off of a touchdown run. And, I mean, the Chargers, they ended up fumbling the ball to give a chance to the Bengals, and the Bengals capitalized with a touchdown, tying the game 27-27. And then the Chargers ended up punting again, but the Bengals missed a field goal, keeping the score tied 27-27. The Chargers punted, and then the Bengals missed another field goal. So if they would have made both of those field goals, then the game would have been way closer than what it actually was. And then the Chargers punted again, and then the Bengals punted it right back. And finally, when the final opportunity to score, the Chargers ended up running the ball all the way into the end zone. The Bengals missed several tackles, and they ended up winning the game. And that's the recap. Again, I'll recap a little bit more of these games, a bit more in depth in future segments, but that's all that I have to say on this 4th segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the 5th and the final segment where we talk about the battle in Dallas, the battle in Texas, whatever you want to, the Texas Bowl, if you want to call it that, because the Texans, they're going to match up against the Cowboys. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned. I love wearing this hat when we're talking about the Cowboys. Anyways, now we're back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm wearing my cowboy hat, and that's because the Cowboys are going to end up playing the Texans, and they're going to be playing in Dallas. And fun fact, Jake Paul already has more wins in the Cowboys Stadium than the Cowboys do in this entire season. Isn't that unbelievable? But of course it's not, because it is just Dallas. That is just what they do. This is their expectations. Everyone knows that Dallas is just disappointing. And look at that Cowboy. Look at him. He's so sad because he knows that the Cowboys, they're going to end up losing in this matchup. I have the Texans winning this game. Now, the Texans, they do have a couple of injuries. It doesn't really seem like CJ Stroud has been playing really well. Having mediocre receivers and having a mediocre line. And despite this, however, I still think that the Texans are going to prevail. This is sort of like a get-right game for Houston. Going off of their last few games, they ended up dropping a game to the Jets. CJ Stroud did not play all that well in this matchup. I mean, he threw 11 completions. He threw 30 passes and only got 11 completions and ended the game with 191 yards. And against the Lions, he ended up dropping an egg in this matchup, despite the fact that Jared Goff turned into Jared Goof, throwing 5 interceptions in this game. The Texans still were able to lose, and they did not score a single point in the entirety of the second half. They got completely shut out, and that was a very bad game coming in from CJ Stroud. And, I mean, you could argue that it was a bad game coming in from Jared Goff, who turned into Jared Goof as well. In fact, not even argue. It was a bad game. But the Texans, they've had some pretty stinker performances with CJ Stroud. Against the Packers, he only threw for 86 passing yards, which is really, really bad. But at the end, they ended up losing to the Packers, of course. But this is sort of their get-right game against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys, they are shorthanded, and not in the usual sense, because, I mean, the Cowboys, they're really bad this season. They have been awful. They have yet to win a single game at home. I don't really expect them to win a game at home this season. Actually, yes, I do expect them to win a game at home, and that is going to be against the Giants on Thanksgiving. I completely expect them to win that game, because let's face it, the Giants, they're not going to win that game. I don't think they're going to win that game. But regardless, CJ Stroud, he's been very, very underwhelming in these last few games. And you can make an argument it's because he doesn't have all that much talent in the receiving area. The O-line has been a little bit mediocre. But against the Cowboys, again, this will be his get-right game. Now, the Cowboys, they're also shorthanded. They do not have their star-studded future quarterback with Dak Prescott. Remember this guy? Yeah, Dak Prescott slid against the 49ers, ended up losing to the Packers in the playoffs. We love Dak. He always just disappoints the Cowboys and their hopes and their dreams. And, I mean, he always beats the Giants, which is why I can't stand him. But aside from that, he always ends up just ruining the hopes and the dreams of all of the Cowboys fans in the end, eventually. And he did so earlier in this season. He went down with a season-ending injury. I'm not saying that I like the fact that he got injured, but again, it's just a little bit funny considering how they recently signed him to the most expensive quarterback contract ever signed, and now he decides to get injured. So it's a little bit ironic, and it's not funny that he got injured. What's funny about it is the timing of when he got injured. That's the funny part about it. But I don't think any player that gets hurt is a funny matter, despite that fact that it's Dak Prescott. But again, these quarterbacks for the Cowboys, they're not that good. I mean, we saw both of them play in the matchup against the Eagles, where they ultimately ended up losing, and we got sad Cowboy over here to represent the fact that the Dallas Cowboys ended up losing. Cooper Rush, again, we know that he's not a good quarterback. We know that he's not a long-term starter. He only threw for 45 yards in this matchup. He did not throw interceptions, but again, 45 yards is just absolutely horrible. and he did complete 13 of his 23 pass attempts, but we did get a Trey Lance sighting in this matchup, and of course he threw an interception. 4 for 6 on completion percentage. Well, 4 for 6 in passing attempts in passes made to passing attempts, and he threw for 21 yards. So again, very lackluster performance coming in from the Cowboys at home. But despite that pitiful performance, I think the Cowboys should start Trey Lance. And I'll explain why. We already know what we're going to get with Cooper Rush. We already know he's not a solid enough quarterback to win you games. And Trey Lance, we haven't really seen a team that has given him a chance. And with Dallas right now, what does Dallas have left to lose? I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs at this rate. And chances are they're not going to be a good team going into the future. So just see what Trey Lance can do and give him a shot. Like, give him a shot to be a starting quarterback in this league. I mean, a lot of people, I remember all of the hype around Trey Lance with the 49ers, and then he ultimately ended up not living up to the hype. But it's lucky that the Niners ended up getting Brock Purdy. But again, I think that we should just see what Trey Lance can do. Like, give him a solid chance to play some decent snaps and see what he can do as a starter. Again, he did not play well in the last matchup, so maybe this will all be just a flop, and maybe he actually isn't as good as people, or he isn't as good as people really predicted him to be. I mean, he was just a really big disappointment for the Niners. It's ironic how they traded all their picks and then they ended up drafting him high, and he did not end up being the same player that a lot of people expected him to be. But they got lucky that they ended up getting Brock Purdy in that draft instead. But regardless, the Cowboys are going to lose. I'm fully confident that the Cowboys are going to lose in this matchup. And just because I say that now, I can just feel it, that somehow they're going to end up winning. But besides that, I mean, Houston is 7-point favorites in this matchup against Dallas. And I mean, I just don't see the Cowboys winning in this game. Not only do they play at home and they haven't won a home game at all this season, same with the Giants, they also haven't won a home game at all in this season, but against the Texans, while they are rather injured, they do still have a really solid team, and they have a much more competent quarterback than Trey Lance and Cooper Rush. I mean, if you want to compare the two, the three actually, C.J. Stroud with Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, everyone is going to pick C.J. Stroud as their quarterback as opposed to picking Trey Lance and as opposed to picking Cooper Rush. I mean, maybe Dallas Cowboys fans are going to pick Cooper Rush or Trey Lance just because they're Cowboys fans and, you know, they don't really know how to think sometimes. But aside from that, I just don't expect the Cowboys to win. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that Dallas is going to prevail? Do you guys think that they're going to finally end up winning a game? I don't think so. That's the reason why I have this Cowboy hat on. And I mean, it's going to be a great game. I really think it's going to be a great game to watch because Dallas is going to get absolutely owned at home. I really hope that the Texans can prevail and win this matchup. But that's all that I have on this segment, and that's it for the show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears. If you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way as well. That's all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and how about them Cowboys? I hope they lose, but tune into the game tonight, and as always, take care.